Hi, welcome to Resin Chem Tech. Today I want to cover my automated garage light system. I had a few challenges to overcome and a few goals that I wanted to meet that eventually involved a smart relay, multiple motion sensors, multiple door sensors, a light level sensor, and even my matrix clock. And of course this all comes together in Home Assistant. So if you want to see how I implemented this, hang around. So when I first started out implementing home automation, one of the things I did was I looked for problems or annoyances in our home that I might be able to solve, especially those things that my wife found annoying. And one of the big things that we both had issues with was control of the overhead garage lighting. So the easy way to show what the big problem is here is to take a quick look at a very simplified diagram of my garage. Now, this is not to scale. This section actually goes back farther, but it'll give you the general idea. There are 13 recessed can lights and a 2-bulb fixture, but the only way to control those lights were through a single pole switch near the entry door of the house. The issue is if you came in from this exterior door, you came into a pitch black garage, there are no windows in the garage, and would have to stumble across the dark, try not to trip over steps to reach the light switch or reach the entry door. There was, for some unexplainable reason, no switch to control the interior lighting over here by the exterior service door. Now, the electricians will say, well, simply replace this with a 3-way switch, run a line with a travel over here, and put a 3-way switch over here. That does solve the problem of being able to control the lights from this door. But the problem it doesn't solve is, if you take a quick look, these are some of the overhead lights. It doesn't show all of them, but these were originally all halogen bulbs. So when the lights were on, it was using a whopping 845 watts. And what was happening was the garage lights were being left on overnight. So putting a 3-way switch in here was not going to solve the problem of that. I needed to find a way to bring it into automation so I could have the lights come on automatically and then, based on certain criteria, have the lights turn off automatically. I had a few other goals that I wanted to accomplish when I started working on this project. First, I wanted the lights to remain on and not automatically turn off as long as motion was still detected in the garage. So if you're moving around the garage, the lights wouldn't go off on you. Next, I wanted the ability to easily, through a flip of a switch, override the automation system and keep the lights on if I was going to be working in the garage for an extended period of time, but I did want to be notified via my phone if the lights had been on for more than 30 minutes. Next, I did not want the lights to automatically come on if there was already adequate ambient light in the garage. For example, if the overhead garage door was open, it was a nice bright sunny day, there was no reason for the overhead lights to turn on. And finally, the system needed to be reliable and needed to be fast. The lights needed to come on immediately when the door was open and motion was detected. This meant that everything was going to have to run locally without reliance on the cloud. So those were my goals heading into the project. Fortunately, I had already built one of these. This is one of my very first DIY electronic projects that I did. And this is actually a multi-sensor following along with a YouTube video by Automation, I believe is how it's pronounced. I'll leave a link down in the video description. And this obviously is an ugly looking thing in a project case. This is well before I had my 3D printer. But the important part is the multi-sensor had temperature and humidity, it had motion detection, it had a light level sensor, and then there was an LED that you can control that I eventually used for the alarm system, but that doesn't have anything to do with the lighting. So this was already built using an ESP8266, and it was already mounted in the garage near that entry door. So with this in place, I figured the only thing I was going to have to do was figure out a way to make this single pole switch a smart switch. Now again, there are different options, switches, relays, and I talk about the difference between smart plugs, smart switches, and smart relays in another video. But in this case, I opted to go with a Shelly 1PM smart relay. Part of the reason I did this was, once again, I wanted this to be local control. And the Shelly line of relays include these nice little pin headers, which makes it very easy to connect to and flash custom firmware, in this case Tasmota. This was before Shelly included MQTT in their relays, so it was necessary for me to flash Tasmota onto this relay. With that in place, I had my relay, I had my motion sensor, I had my light level detector. I started writing the automation and testing. When I came out this entry door, everything worked perfectly. The lights came on almost instantaneously. They didn't come on if there was enough ambient light, and they shut off automatically. However, the problem was still coming in this exterior service door. The problem is that the range of this motion sensor wasn't far enough to detect motion all the way over at this door. In fact, I'd have to cross about halfway across the garage, the dark garage, and wave my arms to get this motion sensor to trigger the lights. So I know I still had a little more work to do. So my next attempt was just to add another motion sensor. I thought by putting a motion sensor here, it would be enough to pick up this door and also cover any movement in this area to keep the lights on. Part of the problem here, though, is I needed this to be wireless. Since this ESP8266 runs off of 5 volts, there was power right here. It wasn't the case with this one. So I knew I was going to have to look at a different protocol because Wi-Fi is too battery, if this is going to be battery operated, Wi-Fi is too battery hungry and too slow to respond. So I was going to have to look for something else. Well, I did happen to have Philips Hue hub and Philips Hue lights. And Philips Hue sold a Zigbee motion sensor. So it wasn't cheap, it was way too expensive for being a motion sensor, but I bought one and put it up, and I still had problems. Whether it was still a problem with the distance or having to angle it this way and missing motion back here, still found myself having to come in this door, stand there, wave your arms, take a couple steps forward before this motion sensor would pick up. And again, because of Hues and being cloud-based, there was a delay. So we lived with that for a little while, and then eventually I come back and built my own motion sensor. And there is one other thing to mention about all motion detectors. They have something called a cooldown time or a cooldown period. Basically, that's the amount of time that after motion is no longer detected, how long it takes for the detector to go back to a non-motion state. And Travis over at Digiblur DIY recently did a YouTube video where he studied this, and I'll leave a link down to his video down below, where he measured the cooldown time of numerous Zigbee motion sensors. And even though the Philips Hue is actually the best here, it's still 8 seconds. So once motion stops being detected, it takes 8 seconds for it to reset. And some of these are as long as a minute and a half. That definitely wasn't going to work in my case. So I knew that the multi-sensor I had built before seemed to have a very, very short recovery time. And sure enough, when I looked at the specs, it actually calls it blockade time here, has a blockade time of only 2 seconds. And that's pretty much what I measured when I tried it out myself in Home Assistant. So we'll come back to Lovelace and the Home Assistant automation, but what I really want you to watch here is how quickly motion is detected and how quickly it resets. So this was definitely a better option than the Hue sensor. So I opted to build my own motion sensor using the same motion sensor I had in that multi-sensor. And as you can tell, by this point in time, I did have a 3D enclosure. I used a D1 Mini. Unfortunately, I did have to supply 5-volt power to it, but the cost of the entire project, minus the cable and a phone charger, which I already had, was about $12 for this motion detector. And I thought I would be golden. So we were back to this same diagram, but now I had my own motion sensor here instead of the Hue motion sensor. But what I found, again, just because of the distance and the range of this, I was still getting inconsistent results. Most of the time it would work, but not always. So we actually just decided to live with it for a while, for about 6 months, primarily over the winter when this door did not get used much. But once spring rolled around, again, I wasn't happy with this and decided that while I could use the motion sensors to keep the lights on, I needed a better way to trigger the lights, and really the only way to do that was going to be make use of door sensors. So this is an Aqara door sensor, but again, this runs off of Zigbee. I wanted to keep everything once again local. Fortunately, Sonoff made a Zigbee bridge that could be flashed with custom Tasmota software and keep everything local. So once I had all the hardware in place and the door sensors there instead of motion detectors, I ended up with something that looked like this. Now, there are a lot of additional devices here because I didn't stop adding things over the winter. The things you see in green are currently not part of the automation for the garage lights, but could easily be adapted and used for that. But you'll see I have reed switches now on both doors, and I've moved this motion sensor to cover motion more in this back area of the garage. And as you can see in this quick little clip, how much faster the lights react to the door. So with all the hardware in place, The rest of this video is going to focus on Home Assistant and the automations that make everything work. Now if we go back to this Lovelace view, remember one of the goals was the ability to override the automation. And of course, this is what indicates that the automation is enabled. Obviously I can turn that off there, and at that point the lights no longer function automatically. Everything will be done manually through switches. In addition, anytime the lights are turned on manually, the automation is disabled. So if I manually turn the lights on here, you'll notice that my automation is now disabled. As soon as I manually turn the lights back off, the automation is re-enabled. This also works with the switch in the garage. So as you can see here, if the switch is flipped on, once again the automation is disabled and remains disabled until the switch is flipped off, at which point the automation is re-enabled. So you might be asking, what happens if someone manually turns on the lights, then goes inside, as you see here, and forgets to turn the lights off? Well, in this case, I actually have automation send me a actionable notification to my phone to tell me that the lights have been on for 30 minutes. Now it shows 15 here, but I've now changed that to 30 minutes. By tapping the off button here, I can actually turn off those garage lights, and as you see, since it's a manual process, if the lights are turned off manually, then the automation is re-enabled as part of turning the lights off. So that takes care of our first goal, which was an easy way to override the automation. That can be done either through Home Assistant or by simply flipping the wall switch that's in the garage. Our next goal was to keep the lights on as long as motion was being detected. And to do that, we're going to need to use a timer. So keep your eye on the timer down there at the bottom. Anytime the lights come on automatically, a 45-second countdown timer is started. That's when the lights will go off when that timer reaches 0. But notice that anytime motion is detected by either motion detector, that timer automatically gets set back up to 45 seconds. So as long as there continues to be motion in the garage, that countdown timer is never going to hit 0 and the lights are going to continue to stay on. This occurs even if the door is shut. There you just saw again, motion was detected, the lights were on, and it got reset to 45 seconds. And as you can see here, once there's no more motion and both doors are closed, when that countdown timer hits 0, the lights are automatically turned off. Okay, that's 2 goals done. Now the next goal was to not have the lights come on automatically if there was already ambient light in the garage. And for that, we're going to use our light sensor. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually opening the garage door. And first notice the listed light level at 100 lux. That's when the garage is dark. That's not really accurate, but what we're really looking for here is we're looking for a substantial change in the light level. Now notice that it just jumped up to 747 lux, I believe. And so now there is plenty of ambient light in the garage. So in this particular case, notice the door just opened, but the lights did not come on. So as long as there's enough ambient light, the automation will not turn on the overhead lights. Of course, you can always turn them on manually via the wall switch if you want to have the lights on. And finally, our last goal, but probably the most important, was that the automations needed to be reliable and they needed to be fast. So as you can see here, the lights come on almost immediately as soon as that door is open. So there's no longer any delay and it works reliably every time. So the final piece of this are the automations themselves. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know I'm a YAML guy. But don't fear, I'm actually going to show you how to take my YAML and recreate these automations using the user interface now available in Home Assistant. So before we get started, there are a couple of extra entities we have to create for our automations. In the Home Assistant UI, these are called helpers. So we're going to go to our configuration and we're going to go to helpers. Now the first entity we have to create is called an input boolean, but when we added a helper here, it's called a toggle. This means it's either true, false, on, or off. And this is going to be our indicator about whether our light automation is enabled or disabled, like when somebody manually flips the switch. So we're just going to hit toggle, and we're just going to give this a name, a meaningful name. Now, mine still is called motion. That's from when I initially only had motion detectors and didn't have the door sensors, and I just never went back and changed the name. So all we have to do is create that to add our input boolean. Next, we need to create a couple of timers. One of these for the 45 seconds of when the lights will go off after there's no motion and the doors are closed, and the other one is for our phone notification. So again, we're just going to go down here, select timer, and again, give these meaningful names. Motion timer. We can set a default duration if we want. So we'll set this at, 45 seconds. And then we repeat that same process by creating another timer for our notifications, push notifications to our phone. In this case, we would set our duration to 30 minutes, and we're going to give this just a simple name of Garage Notify. That's it for the helpers. So now that we have our helpers created, we're ready to create our automations. So let's take a look at the YAML version of these automations, and again, I'll show you at least on the first one how to recreate that through the UI. So this first automation basically is going to disable that automation if the lights are turned on via a manual switch. So again, if the switch is turned on or you use Home Assistant to manually turn the lights on, it's going to disable the automation. Here's how we'll create this through the UI. Again, we'll go to our configuration. This time we'll select automations, and we're going to add an automation. Now, sometimes Home Assistant can try to create these automations for you automatically. I found I spend more time cleaning up that, so we're going to start with an empty automation. We need to give this a unique name. So in this case, we're going to just match what we have here: garage lights on with switch. We can give it an optional description, but now we need to take a look at the triggers we need to define. So here's our trigger. So we select the trigger type. We're going to choose state. Now we need to choose an entity. So again, this is our garage light switch. So switch garage light switch, and there it is. So we select that, and what we want to do is we want this to trigger when it goes from off to on. Okay, that's the only trigger we've got, so we don't need to add any more. We don't need to worry about how long it's been on. We want this to happen right away. Now we need to add some conditions. So we're going to add a condition, and again, our condition type is going to be state. So select that. Again, we need the entity ID. So this is going to be our input boolean that we defined, or our helper that we defined earlier. Again, whether that automation is enabled or not. And we want to be sure that that state is on. Now we need to add another condition. Again, once again, the type is state. Our entity ID is from our actual door sensor that was created for us. It's a binary sensor, garage service door, and there it is. So select that. We want to make sure that the door is closed or off, and then we repeat and add another state condition for the second door, or the service door. Again, this is created from our integration with our Zigbee door sensor. So it's a binary sensor, and this time it's the garage service door. Garage service door, there it is. Oops, I already created the garage service. This is the garage, in my case, it's called laundry door. That's the entry door into the house. We also want to make sure that the state of that is off. Okay, so those are our conditions. Now we need our action, which is right down here. So again, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to toggle off that automation binary or input boolean, or the helper. So again, in this case, we're going to call a service. Our service is going to be input boolean, and we want to turn off. And then the input boolean we want to turn off, we can pick our entity, and our input boolean, we can actually scroll, there it is, garage motion enabled. So we select that, and that's all we need for automation. We would click save, and it would basically create the same automation that's here in YAML. So I'm not going to take the time to walk through and show you how to use the UI to create all of these automations, as each one is exactly the same as this first one. But I will briefly walk through the logic of some of the rest of the automations. So the first one we just covered, that disables the automation whenever the lights are manually turned on through Home Assistant or the switch. This is the reverse of that. Basically, we're going to re-enable the motion anytime the lights are turned off. So again, it's pretty simple. when the light switch goes from off to on, we're going to re-enable that input boolean or that toggle helper to turn our automations back on. The next ones are pretty simple. Just the lights on when the doors are open. So there's one for the service door and one for the laundry door. They're exactly the same. So again, we're going to look for our sensor that's on our door going from off to on. We're going to check a couple of conditions. Is our automation enabled? We're also going to check in this case the light level, which came from that multi-sensor, and make sure that the light level is below a preset value. In this case, I use 120 lux. If it's not below that, then it's not going to turn the lights on. Then all we're going to do is we're going to turn on our light switch to turn the lights on, and we're going to start our 45-second timer. Again, the laundry door is exactly the same. These are the ones that every time one of our motion sensors goes from off to on and motion is detected, all we're going to do is take that timer and we're going to reset it back to 45 seconds. So as you saw before in the Lovelace demo, every time motion is detected and that timer is counting down, it's just going to reset it to 45 seconds. That's done with both of the motion detectors. We're also going to start our 45-second timer anytime both doors are now closed. So that once this door closes, it's going to start that 45-second timer. Again, we're going to do that with both doors. And then what we've got to do is we've got to handle the situation when that timer does finally hit 0. So when that timer finishes, we're going to check a number of conditions. We need to make sure that first of all, our automation is turned on. We make sure we have no motion on either one of our motion detectors and make sure that both doors are closed. If so, we're simply going to turn our lights off. And finally is our notification for if the lights have been left on for more than 30 minutes. Basically, we're just going to check the light switch in this case, and if it's been on for 30 minutes, we're simply going to send a notification to my phone with the message the lights are on for 30 minutes. And to make this an actionable notification, we're going to give a button on there that says turn off the lights. And this is the automation that will run from the notification. Again, simply just turns the lights off. So while it took a few attempts and a little bit of trial and error and multiple devices, overall I've met all the goals and I'm extremely happy with the system I have now. It has been very reliable, and since everything is running locally, it's very fast, and most importantly, my wife is very happy. So that's going to do it for this video. If you found anything useful or anything that you liked about the video, please hit that like button down below. That lets both me and YouTube know you'd like to see more videos like this. If you'd like to see some of my other videos, hit that subscribe button down in the lower corner and tick that little bell icon if you want to be notified when I release new videos. As always, thanks for watching and hope to see you soon.